I'm going to talk to you about biomimicry. Biomimicry, I discovered this concept, or I came across this concept 8 years ago, and it was a real pleasure, if not a treasure for me. And why is that? Well, maybe the most two important good news brought by biomimicry and that I want to share with you. The first is that nature is really an immense source of inspiration to new recipes, to new ways of being in balance with the biosphere and to reconnect with the biosphere. That's the first good news. The second good news is that thanks to this interdependence with all other species, we know now that we are not alone to clean up this mess that was already mentioned yesterday. And that's really a very big source of hope. But before going into these details, I wanted to first explain you how I got there. The first step maybe was as a kid. As a kid, I developed a passion for birds and then for insects, dolphins, flowers, you name it. And this really became something really deeply rooted inside me. And it also allowed me to spend so many good moments in nature. That was the first step. Then, as a bioengineer student, I had really the huge privilege to go to Antarctica. Antarctica, as you know, is one of the hotspots of beauty on this planet. And I must say that beside these mystic moments with this beauty, I also discovered the other side. And that is that on the beaches which are exposed to the north, so to our civilizations, they were also littered with plastic and human garbage. And that was a shock. And that's the shock also who then led me to really go into environmental issues and to engage into restoring our broken relationship with the earth. Then, because of that, I went to work to the International Polar Foundation, which was created, so-called, to bridge the gap between science and society on the main environmental issues. And then one I especially worked on was climate change. So I was really paid to discover and to read as much as I could about climate change. And while doing this, something really struck me. It was the huge gap between the challenge, the huge challenge of climate change on one side and the shyness of our response on the other side. Because basically what we've been told is switch off the light, turn off the tap, and everything will be all right. And there was something not enough. I really looked for something more radical. And that's when I came across Janine Benyus, who launched the concept, and biomimicry. And I can tell you, for me, it was really an aha moment. Because, of course, the dolphins, the birds, the crustaceans like my dear Antarctic red knight, of course, they knew perfectly how to be sustainable. How did I not come to that before? And that's how I decided, together with friends, to create this consultancy on biomimicry. Finally, I'm also a dad. Seeing my kids is my first contact with life every morning. And of course, kids are a very strong motivation for our work. Every parent knows that and share that. But my kids also inspire me some emotions that I would like to share with you this morning. Every now and then, when I listen to them, arise some emotions, some feelings. Feelings of sadness for what we are losing. Feelings of angst for our lack of collective commitment. No, today we know in which situation we are. Today we have the tools to react. Yet today it seems that we still refuse to take this challenge seriously. Feelings of sadness, feelings of angst, it's also part of my truth that I wanted to share with you. But okay, let's now move back to the wonders of the natural world, beginning with a very easy question, easy maybe not, simple question. What would be the longest flight without refueling around the Earth? Is it a plane? Is it Superman? No, it's a bird. Actually, it's a shorebird, and this shorebird is migrating without stop from Alaska to New Zealand. That means 10 days of flight, about 15,000 kilometers. And like all migrating birds, the bar-tailed godwit, that's the name of the bird, the godwit, starts by using fat storage. So during 7 days, it uses this fat storage. But after 7 days, this fat is over, is all burned. Then the bird is lighter and makes a remarkable switch. He moves to using the proteins of his muscles, of his wing muscles. So in fact, it's digesting part of its engine, because its engine is now too powerful, to fuel the rest of the engine. This is clearly something we don't do in our airplanes yet. And it really shows the beauty of the, let's say, life chemistry, the same chemistry that we have inside our bodies. And on top of that, look how beautiful this bird is. This is the godwit on its nesting grounds in the tundra before taking its flight south to our shores. I can come now really to define biomimicry. Biomimicry, in essence, is a call to the ancients. The ancients, that means all other species living on Earth, most of them for much longer than us. Life has been on Earth for 3.8 billion years. And so it has accumulated a lot of experience. And in a way, we can look at evolution as a long effort of research and development to sustainability. And of course, there's much more experience there than in our young species. Just to give you a taste or a perfume, let's say here, of the huge potential of biomimicry, I'm just going to show you these specifications proposed to an architect. So imagine that you would like a building with 60 meters of height, that's easy, a ground surface circular with 2 meters diameter, the 20-meter top part with a flexible surface of small solar panels, also regulating humidity, painted in green and biodegradable with a total area of 15 hectares. Wow. With foundations only 3 meters deep. Okay, so that's becoming a bit more tricky. But it's not finished. Let's use free material extracted on site in a silent and invisible way. A building self-assembling and self-repairing in a matter of months, able to reproduce itself, welcoming for living organisms, and finally, the whole design fitting in a minute box. You drop the box and the building is coming. Wow, this is really spooky, tricky, strange, whatever. No humans can do that yet. And of course, you have understood that in nature, some creatures do that for millions of years. And I was, of course, speaking about trees. So that's how far we could go. But now let's come to a first real example of the use of biomimicry. And this is an example of shape. Shape is the easiest and, let's say, the shallowest level of biomimicry. But it's a good way to understand how to work with it. Here, the example is clear. You had this high-speed train, a Japanese high-speed train, with a lot of troubles when entering tunnels. Because each time it enters tunnel, a sudden rise in pressure, and then vibrations, more energy consumption. And the engineer working on that used exactly the biomimetic way. He just thought, who in nature has the same problem as my train? And that's how he came to diving birds, and specifically to this kingfisher. And from there, they mimicked, they got the inspiration to produce this shape, allowing now the train to use about 15% less fuel when it enters, or less energy when it enters tunnels. So that's for shape. But we can go much further than that by looking at by getting inspiration at how nature builds its materials. Because nature, for example, always avoids high temperature, high pressure, and toxic solvents, which is not exactly our technique. And to explain this example, here you have our fiberglass. We make our fiberglass at 1,500 degrees. Whereas this sponge here, it's a sponge, it's a glass sponge, it makes it at 4 degrees centigrade. It's living in the deep sea, and in the deep sea, it silently produces this glass fiber. This has been now mimicked by engineers, and so we can use the same recipe. Engineers specialize in what we call biomineralization. Another about materials is the realm of the photovoltaic panel, solar panel industry. Because as you know, in our industry, in our solar panels, we are using mainly silica and also some rare earths and rare metals. Where could we get the inspiration from? Well, that's quite obvious. All these plants here around are using solar panels. They are converting light into electricity. A big difference, though, they do it with chemistry based on carbon. And so now there are many labs around the world working exactly on that, developing solar panels which will need much less energy to be built, which won't need any of these rare materials, and which will be also much easier to recycle at the end of their life. But biomimicry can also inspire us for management. And here the inspiration comes in another way. It comes from the way species relate to each other within ecosystems, producing these amazing circular economies with such an efficient use of energy and materials. From all these observations, you can really constitute a list of what we call the life principles, and probably the most important of them is the power of cooperation. The power of cooperation that has been already mentioned a lot and will be more probably, and which really allows us to move out of this exhausting addiction to competition. So now we can move out of this jungle law of competition and predation, because biology also acknowledges every day more that the major innovations in life evolution were a result of cooperation and technically a symbiosis. Think, for example, about plants. We all think that plants do photosynthesis. Well, in fact, they don't. It's actually the blue algae within them who do it. So blue algae are a special kind of bacteria who a long time ago made a deal with the plants to enter their cells and become what we call chloroplasts, making photosynthesis for the plants. They first did it in algae, but then with the plants they invade the continents, and without this symbiosis we wouldn't have plants, we wouldn't have fruits, monkeys or humans. So it's really one of the fundamental symbiosis which gave rise to this biodiversity we know now. So clearly, if you want to innovate, just learn with nature how to cooperate within or outside your businesses or communities. Then there's another tip from the ecosystem, and this is that the biggest centralized organism in nature is a whale and its brain. So why am I showing a tree? Well, that's because a tree is not centralized. Think about it. If you cut a tree, you might have new trees coming from the stump, or you also might have new trees from the branch if you put them back in the soil and treat them in an appropriate way. By the way, don't do that with your dog's tail. Bad idea. So, but why is that? It's that because a tree is really a colony of buds, which means that there's no command and control center in the tree nowhere, and there's a lot of local autonomy and in terms of decision makings and feedbacks. In top of that, even in a whale or in humans, which are also known for their big brains, don't forget that there's a lot of things happening without the brain. I mean, think about respiration, think about digestion or immunity. So decentralization is really something rare in nature. If now we look to ecosystems, this power of decentralization is even pushed further. Of course, you know that there are no central tree in a forest telling the forest how to behave. And instead, there's cooperation everywhere. One of the nicest stories about cooperation in forests is between trees and mushrooms or fungi. Fungi are producing what we call mycelium. Mycelium is a fine network which will be between the roots of trees and in connection with these roots. And so the fungus will harvest water and minerals and deliver it to the tree, whereas the tree in response will give the sugars that it has synthesized. So that's the basic of the relationship. But more recently, researchers have shown that a same network, a same mycelium, connects all trees which are completely in the sunlight and young trees still trying to get to there. And actually what they showed is that the old trees transfer their excess sugars through the mycelium to the young trees, which is basically family allowances. But it went a step further, because then it was shown that the same mushroom, the same fungus, can connect different species of trees together, which means that at any time, the tree which is in the good condition of this particular day will again transfer its excess sugars to the trees which are in less favorable conditions. And why do they do that? It's because it's a way of guaranteeing the health of the whole forest. So that's really telling a story and showing what can we do out of that. Clearly encourage local autonomy and cooperation at the same time. Now, these life principles that we learn in forests and in other ecosystems, we can apply them nearly everywhere, and including to forest management, funnily enough. Here it's just an example of maybe a perfect tree, this Iroko tree from West Africa, which has a particular way of relating to bacteria and mushrooms to produce what we call limestone, or let's say calcite. You can see these stones pointed by the arrow. These stones are produced by the symbiosis between the tree, the mushroom, and the bacteria. And why is it doing that? It's to correct the acidity of the soil. So these trees grow mainly in dry tropical soils. And so they are a perfect species for reforestation program, and especially agroforestry, since they correct the acidity of the soil. And like all trees, they also protect biodiversity. They restore the water cycle. And on top of that, because of this special metabolism, they store an additional third of carbon, and in a very stable way. And such the first reforestation program based on such a species is now underway in Haiti. Maybe one of the last lessons from ecosystems. This Antarctic snail has chosen not to build a protective and expensive shell. And that's thanks to cooperation again. Instead, he has on its back, protecting himself, a sea anemone. And the sea anemone, in return, gets a free ride to food. And the lesson of that is that whenever you want to make cooperation, it entails some risk. And it demands trust. That's something important that we will be able to experience during these days. Then finally, maybe the most important thing to remember is our radical interdependence with all other species on Earth. This wonderful truth should really become a feeling deep inside us that can then guide our decisions as much as possible, of course, in our daily life and in our businesses. And I'm going to give some other words capturing this wisdom as an end. Every night in towns, millions of people sleep in peace. It is a wonderful thing to ponder about this trust. We forget the necessary beings for all these breath. It is not so much the plants which live in towns as the towns which grow into a world of plants. Thank you very much.